You are tuned into the Dr. Tyna Show with Dr. Tyna Moore. For more, visit drtyna.com. On this episode of the Dr. Tyna Show, I'm sitting down with Nathalie Niddam. Nathalie is an expert in peptides and bioregulators, and this is a conversation I've been wanting to have with her for a long time. You guys have been asking me for this episode, and I finally got her on. So without further ado, let's jump in. You guys, I found something really helpful. Monitoring blood biomarkers is extremely important, as you know, and keeping tabs on your inflammation, your metabolic health, your hormone levels, your lipids, all of that is super important. And I like to do it a few times a year. However, I admittedly have gotten really lazy about it because I live out in the country and getting to any kind of draw facility is like a 35, 40-minute drive, depending on traffic. And I don't love doing that in the morning, combating traffic and being in the fasted state, right? Which is the best place to test your biomarkers. And so I recently discovered Cyfox Health. I'm really excited because they have these at-home blood testing kits that you test on your own time. They make it affordable enough for you to actually test on a regular basis. And then once you get the results, they provide you with intuitive explanations, insights, recommendations, and personalized action plans based on your test results and your goals. There's 3 markers that I always want to keep tabs on, and that would be number 1, fasting insulin, number 2, hemoglobin A1C, which is basically a 3-month marker of how sugared up your red blood cells are, and believe it or not, vitamin D, which is pretty critical this time of year as we're going into upper respiratory season. I really want to make sure that my vitamin D levels are optimized. But again, the problem is that blood testing is inconvenient and oftentimes expensive for the general public. And once you get your lab results, if you're not trained like I am, once you get them, it's really hard to know what to do with them. Again, Cyfox Health is the solution. Their at-home testing makes it so that you don't have to drive to the clinic anymore. You don't have to wait in line. There's no more scheduling challenges. Their sample collection kit lets you collect your sample using only a few drops of blood from the comfort of your home. I've done it myself. It's really easy. They've uniquely developed their test to concentrate on the 17 essential biomarkers in one single easy at-home kit. It's incredibly cost-effective. Cyfox has cut the cost of blood work by over 88% to create the absolutely lowest cost per biomarker test on the market. And with low-cost, convenient, regular testing, you can regularly monitor and track your body's improvements to help achieve your personal goals and to see if the hard work you're putting in is actually moving the needle. I'm excited to be working with Cyfox Health to make it easier for you. Visit cyfoxhealth.com/Dr. Tyna to get 20% off to test your blood at home and begin working toward a healthier you. That's SIPHOX health.com/DRTYNA. You guys, there's a problem on the island of Maui. In 1959, 9 axis deer were introduced to the island, and they are an invasive species. Their population has exploded, and they're now devastating the island of Maui's ecosystem. Left unchecked, Maui is in trouble. Fortunately, the folks at Maui Nui have stepped in to right the ship. They're wild harvesting these axis deer, utilizing humane, stress-free hunting methods as a way to bring this food source to our plates. Maui Nui is the only source for Maui's exceptionally healthy, delicious, wild harvested axis deer meat. Venison is one of the healthiest red meat species on the planet. The omega ratios in these animals are unmatched with their high protein content. I'm loving their meat sticks right now, and I'm keeping them on hand at all times so I can hit my protein macros throughout the day and not make poor food choices. Each stick is 10 grams of protein, and they have kept me thriving all summer. Usually you have to have a hot husband who knows how to hunt well to get venison in your freezer, but now you can buy direct from Maui Nui. Here's the catch. Supplies are limited by nature. Responsible population management means they won't go beyond harvest capacity. Memberships are the best way to support the mission and provide access to this one-of-a-kind protein. Secure your spot now. Maui Nui Venison is offering Dr. Tyna Show listeners 20% off your first purchase of jerky, sticks, fresh venison, and bone broth while supplies last. Visit www.mauinuivenison.com/Dr. Tyna for 20% off. Nathalie Niddam, thanks so much for coming on the Dr. Tyna Show. I am so excited to finally have you here. I've been a big fan for a long time. You are like the peptide queen in my eyes. So I'm really glad to get you on because my audience has been asking me so many questions that I know you're going to be a wealth of information, of answers.
Well, Dr. Tyna, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I totally have a podcast girl crush on you.
Oh, yay.
I'm like, she wants me on her show. Yes.
Yeah. I'm excited. Well, this is such a great conversation, and you are the one to bring it because your Instagram, your content, your podcast is huge. And if you guys don't know about her yet, you will soon. And just go follow all the things because I've learned so much from you. And I want to ask you, I didn't ask you this off the air. How on earth did you get started in all this? Like, how did you amass this knowledge? You seem to be the go-to.
Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask my husband, he would call it shiny object syndrome. If you ask me, I would say I'm a perpetual learner, right? And it's kind of like this really interesting journey, like I studied physiology. First of all, I was the kid who was the geek that read National Geographic from cover to cover. And then I studied physiology in university, and then I kind of lost my way and ended up doing something completely unrelated most of my life, except for the fact that I was a fitness instructor my whole life. And so that kind of a little bit kept my hand in things. And about 15 years ago, I got so sick of what I was doing. And I've always kept that love of science. I've always had like my hand in it, that my heart was always there. I remember when I was finished with university, I was like, I missed it. I missed the learning and I just missed it. And anyway, so I went back to school and I became a holistic nutritionist. And from there, and one thing that the day we graduated, the thing that the woman who owns the school I went to said that always stayed with me was, you've now graduated. Now's when you start learning. Mm-hmm. Like now's when your journey really begins, because all we've done is given you a platform, like a launching pad. And this is where each one of you is going to go in your own direction and take this with you into the world, which was really powerful. I didn't even realize it at the time. And Dave Asprey was just really getting started in the biohacking space at the time. And so I did his human potential coach training program, which was really a very cool tool in my belt because it was really about helping people to change their behavior. And then from there, I got interested in epigenetics. And then I started going to all these conferences, and I came across a talk by Dr. Dan Stickler at PaleoFX back when there was a PaleoFX. And I sat myself down, and he was sitting there talking about apidolon, melanotan, and BPC 157. And by the time he was done with those three compounds, my jaw was on the floor. I was like, I tapped the shoulder of the guy in front of me. I'm like, is this for real? And the guy turns to me. Turns out this was the owner of a compounding pharmacy. He goes, "Oh, dude, this is the future. This is the future of medicine and healthcare." And I was like, all right. So I come home and I tell my husband, I'm like, I've just heard about these amazing things. And he's like, dude, you need to stop this. Like, it's something new every day. Like, you just gotta, enough. You've got what you need. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And it was just like this unstoppable tractor beam. And I just dove in, and I've never really resurfaced.
Well, thank goodness, because, I truly, I don't pretend to be a peptide expert all around, and I get asked a lot of questions, and I'm like, I know what I know about GLP-1s because I was so interested in them, and I spent a year doing nothing but reading everything I could get my hands on. But when it comes to all the other peptides, I have used some of them clinically, and I've used them mostly in the regenerative medicine space. And I was really just trying to heal joints, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe just give somebody a booster with maybe they've got some burnout, or they're coming out of an illness, or they're not feeling well. But when I listen to you, and then you go off on this whole tangent of bioregulators, and I'm like, what the heck is all this? Like this, I could see why it would become all encompassing, because it's really exciting. And unfortunately, the FDA keeps shutting down great access to some of these, but we still have some. So that's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, well, we have lots. What the FDA really went after, with the exception of one, they went after the longer chain peptides. And I think they're already coming out as drugs. I think it's either KPV or VIP recently got released as a drug by a pharma company. So, I think what we're going to start to see is peptides repurposed by pharma companies as drugs. The challenge with that is when you have something like BPC 157 that is so pleiotropic, it has so many different applications in the human body, we're going to lose that scope if you will, of benefits. But, we can do what we can do. The good news is that BPC-157 is still very much on the table as an oral compound. So, and it's still good. I mean, it's not quite as powerful as it is when it's introduced systemically, but oral BPC-157 is still very good for a lot of things. And, I think there's a lot of people who are working very hard at trying to figure out how do we make more of these peptides bioavailable orally. And there's some really interesting stuff out there. And I know you work with integrative peptides. Kent Holtar figured out a long time ago that if you take thymosin beta-4, that is a 43 amino acid chain, but it has 7 docking arms, right? And if you snap off those docking arms, each one has a different function. And so once you get down to the 3 to 4 amino acid chain, it's less likely to get broken down in the gut. So it's more bioavailable orally. And I'm going to segue to bioregulators here because there's a real possibility that some of those 3 to 4 amino acid chains that have been isolated from the thymosin beta-4 complex actually are bioregulators. Right. And so what makes a bioregulator? Like right now, the 21 bioregulator peptides that are available commercially were designated as such by the man who really discovered them and did all the work on them, which is Dr. Vladimir Kavan-Zinn, who is was a Russian doctor researcher who was in the military. And when he was a very young doctor in the Russian military, was approached by his superiors and asked or told or tasked, if you will, with figuring out a way to help their military who were coming back from nuclear submarine missions at the time when nuclear submarines were not really people weren't protected all that well in them, and they probably still aren't, to be honest. And they were coming back from space. Their aging had accelerated. And they basically said to him, Vladimir, you need to figure out a solution. So that's the good news. The better news is you've got carte blanche. We've got factories full of workers you can try stuff out on. We're going to buy you every lab rat animal you'll ever want. You've got access to funds and whatever you need, just go to town, which is not something that will really happen again today. And what Kavan-Zinn at the time figured out, he found these like tiny little proteins, like only 2 to 4 amino acids. So they were tiny little proteins. And what he figured out is they're actually present in virtually every single life form. And typically when researchers find something that's preserved across species, they're like, if it's important enough for Mother Nature, we need to be paying attention here. And so that's where his work really kind of came from. And fast forward 35 years of research later, including a lot of human research, he had isolated and identified about 21 of these bioregulators, each one of which corresponds to a tissue, gland, or organ because it's so tiny, is able to cross the cellular membrane. It gets across into the nucleus of the cell. And what lives in your nucleus but your DNA? And on the DNA, they basically bind to the DNA, upregulating the production of proteins.
Okay.
And so it initiates a cellular regeneration from within. And there's another gentleman by the name of Bill Lawrence, who I've had on my podcast a number of times, who was working with Kavan-Zinn until he passed away at the end of last year, very, very closely. And the latest hypothesis they were working with was that actually what the bioregulators are doing is, could the bioregulators be restoring the DNA's ability to repair itself? So, what I found so fascinating about this and why I find bioregulators and even peptides, to be honest, and so many other things so fascinating is all they're doing is it's almost like they're reawakening the body's own repair mechanism.
Yes. This is why I say they're regenerative. And when I say that, people say, I've had people argue me and say, oh, well, so if I put, some cardiomyocytes in a petri dish and drop GLP-1 on it, they're not going to regenerate new heart tissue. I'm like, the body's ability to regain the ability to repair itself And or the ability, like when I would explain regenerative medicine to my patients when I was going to be doing an injection, I'm like, we may not be able to regenerate that cartilage damage in full, but more often than not, we can abate further pathology and the cycle that people are in, this pathologic cycle where cytokine production and all the other things start to really go full bore. We can slow the roll and maybe not completely shut it off. But to me, that's regenerative because you're reinitiating the cell's ability to do its thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. And if we can, Cavinson would talk about I think it was a 42% biological reserve. And he said, on average, people live to about 80, but really natural human lifespan should be up to 120 years.
Oh my gosh.
And so what can we do to tap in to that 40% of biological reserve to bring to help people to live longer and better? And maintain their health. And, what I want to say to the audience, which is what I say till I'm blue in the face to anybody who'll sit still long enough, is none of this means anything if you haven't done your foundation work. None of this means anything if you're not sleeping, eating properly, getting outside, managing your stress, moving, exercise, like the whole 9 yards. But if you can keep your body at this, reasonably close to this homeostasis, the state of homeostasis, and now you have access to something that can restore, like the pineal gland bioregulator is so incredible in its potential impact, because if it can restore melatonin production to an optimal level, if it can help to reset a circadian rhythm, if it can activate telomerase, if it can, from a top-down approach, kind of have a modulating effect on the endocrine system. So it's even impactful for carbohydrate metabolism, like things like that. It's very impactful on the immune system. So now if we can bring things on board, it's like getting the chips refreshed on your motherboard. Like you're just refreshing things, and you're not taking anybody back to when they were 20. You're just kind of keeping them in that what should be healthy middle age.
Yes.
Right.
I love that. Yeah, it's a really nice way to put it. And so true. I want to beat that drum home. If you're not dealing with the basics on the regular, none of these work very well. This is where I get a lot of questions about microdosing GLP-1s. I'm like, that is reserved for metabolically optimized people. That strategy is not a strategy for folks who are not already somewhat metabolically healthy, who aren't already somewhat well-muscled and somewhat dialed in on their nutrition and their stress mitigation and their sleep and all of the things. I look at peptides as like, we're just kind of tweaking things.
Yeah.
We're just, again, you and I were talking offline and I was talking about the dial. It's like the way I would explain things to patients as well, when they would come in for a regenerative injection into their knee, for instance, I'm like, I'm just incrementally turning up the dial of healing while incrementally turning down the dial of pain. These are not one-shot wonders in any way.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, the interesting thing about peptides sometimes is they can make a dent when you're off kilter.
Yes.
They're just not going to optimize, right?
Yes.
You can only optimize from homeostasis, right? You've got to be in a homeostatic state to optimize. If you're way below the line here, you're going to have to get yourself back to that balanced state so that you can start overperforming. And if you think about it, we can come up with a million analogies that make sense here. So anyway, so all that to say that the bioregulators, the way they work is you've got 21 bioregulators. Each one corresponds to a different tissue, gland, or organ. So for example, I keep saying that. So for example, we have a pineal gland bioregulator. We have a bioregulator for the brain and the nervous system. We have a bioregulator for the thymus gland, the thyroid gland. You have one for the adrenals, for the heart, for the lungs, for the pancreas, for the liver, blood vessels, bone marrow, ovaries, testes, like prostate, like cartilage, which is really fascinating. So you have all these different systems, and the way that Cavinson studied them was so interesting, because the first thing he started to study is, can these help people not to die as soon? And he very much didn't ask the question, can we help them to live longer? Because frankly, if people are so long-lived, those studies are really hard to do. So he's like, if I give someone bioregulator peptides, can I help them not to die as fast. So his old people studies that I've talked about ad nauseum, but they're really interesting because all he used in those old people studies was he used one bioregulator in one and two bioregulators in the other. And in the first one, he used the pineal gland bioregulator, and he had a control group and a test group. The control group got an injection of polyvitamins. The test group got an injection of a particular form of the pineal gland bioregulator that we don't have access to in North America. But it was an extract of pineal gland from animals, from young animals, that was injected intramuscularly. And what he was able to show is that after 12 years, it was like the mortality rate in the test group was 44% lower or something than the control group.
Wow.
So it was a big deal. And then the next time he took even older people, and he now had three groups. He had his control group. He had the first test group that got the pineal gland bioregulator, and the second group that got the pineal gland and the thymus gland. So now we have an optimized, like an immune system and the pineal gland. And those guys crushed it. Like they just crushed it. Like after 6 years, I think it was 88% of the control group was gone. 44% of the people that got the pineal gland bioregulator alone. And then I think it was 33% of the group that got the pineal gland and thymus bioregulator. But what's really interesting is when you look at the data, not only did they live longer, but they were healthier. So they had better bone density, they had a better immune system, they had better sense of well-being. Like all of these metrics were better. So the bioregulators are fascinating. They're available. The other nice thing about bioregulators is they are available as nutritional supplements. And so when people often will ask me, like, where do they come from? Is there another way to get them? I'm like, let's look at the community of people that eat organs from animals.
Yes.
Where do bioregulators come from? They come from organs. They come from animal tissue. Right. So when we're eating, like whether it's Heart and Soil or Ancestral Supplements or any of these companies that take organs, dry them out, crush them and put them into capsules, you are getting some dose of bioregulator in there. And so I think that's why people experience such transformative benefits from them sometimes when they hit the right combination. And you're getting it in a whole food form.
Do you love honey? Who doesn't, right? Have you ever tried Manuka honey? Are you looking for a little sweet treat with health benefits to use as a pick-me-up or after a workout? Well, I've got something for you. I've recently gone back to using my favorite type of honey again, and I'm loving it, so I wanted to share. If you've never tried Manuka honey, you are missing out on an incredibly healing type of honey. Not only is it rich and dark and complex, but it's got a plethora of health benefits. I've prescribed it many a time for my patients for wound healing with excellent results. It's awesome for skin in general. It supports good oral health, supports gut health. It can soothe sore throats and cough, and it even promotes deep sleep. I take a spoonful daily, either on my yogurt or usually I just eat it straight. I particularly love using it as a little pick-me-up in the afternoon or, like I said, after a workout. The brand of Manuka honey I'm loving right now is Manukora honey. It's rich, creamy, and honestly one of the most delicious honeys I've ever had. It's ethically produced by Manukora's master beekeepers in the remote forests of New Zealand. The bees collect the nectar from the Manukora tea tree in New Zealand. It's ethically produced by Manukora's master beekeepers in the remote forests of New Zealand. The bees collect the nectar from the Manuka tea tree in New Zealand. The nectar is packed with bioactives, and the honey that is produced has 3 times more antioxidants and probiotics than your average honey. A special antibacterial compound called MGO also comes from the nectar of the tea tree. Tea tree is amazing. Manukora third-party tests every single harvest for this MGO and makes these results available through their QR system. All you need is 1 heaping teaspoon each day to get the most out of the amazing bioactives in Manuka. It's honey with superpowers. If you want to try Manukora honey, head to manukora.com/Dr. Tyna to get $25 off the starter kit, which comes with an MGO 850 plus Manuka honey jar, 5 honey travel sticks, a wooden spoon, and a guidebook. That's Manukora, manukora.com/Dr. Tyna for $25 off your starter kit. If you've been a listener of the Dr. Tyna Show for any amount of time, then you know how much I love beef. Beef is truly a superfood. It's chock full of so many nutrients that you can't readily find elsewhere. It's low allergen and it's relatively easy to digest. Plus, when it's fermented, like in my favorite snack, Paleo Valley beef sticks, these nutrients become even more bioavailable. So I think of Paleo Valley beef sticks as not only my favorite snack food, but little portable nutrient-rich packets of protein. The other reason I love them is because these beef sticks are made with 100% grass-fed and finished beef that comes from small American-owned farms that practice rotational grazing. Rotational grazing is when farmers literally rotate the pastures in which their cattle graze, so they aren't feeding on the same soil forever, which can lead to nutrient depletion in the soil and the cattle. This makes the meat in Paleo Valley beef sticks even more nutrient rich. And they use old world methods of fermentation, which gives the beef sticks a long shelf life without the use of harmful acids and chemical preservatives. These are portable, nutrient rich, and clean little packets of protein that you, your kids, and your grandkids will love. So keep them on hand. I've got Paleo Valley beef sticks literally stashed everywhere in case of emergency. You can save 15% off right now on your first order by heading over to paleovalley.com/Dr. Tina. This sounds so much like Royal Lee's work. Do you know Royal Lee? Do you know of him?
No.
Oh my goodness. I've got a rabbit hole for you. So have you heard of, you must have heard of Weston Price, right? The Weston Price.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So back in that time period, we had Royal Lee, we had Weston Price, and we had Pottenger. And Royal Lee is who developed standard process. And
oh, okay.
He had a very unique way of extracting substances out of glands. And yes, they sell what I call them beastie bits, the ground up glandulars. And they've sold standard process is like the OG glandular company.
Absolutely.
But he had a very specific way of extracting something out of these glands. And that supposedly is in some of these products as well. And he was onto something because the story goes, the FDA came in and burned down his lab. But he had two sets. This is in the 30s, I believe, or the early 40s. He had 2 sets of notes. So he was able to continue his work because he had a whole second set of copy of his notes. But yeah, like they came after him. And then Pottenger, so Weston Price was traveling the world at the time looking at people's nutrition. And as they changed to a Western diet, they were obviously their health. He wrote a book for anyone listening, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, changed my life. But like Royal Lee, and then Pottenger was study cats. And do you know the Pottinger's cats? Yeah, I'll just tell it really quick for the audience.
Yeah.
Basically, he was taking cats and he was feeding them cooked meat and pasteurized milk, which is not what they should be eating because they're cats. And within a few generations, they developed heart. Yeah, they've developed like boggy colons, fatty liver, became infertile, and it took multiple generations to get them back to health and fertility. And I always joke that my generation, probably we're Pottinger's cats. Like we're of that first ilk, right? So yeah, so our children and our children's children, like that's a whole other thing of what's going on. And people are like, why is infertility so high? I'm like, Pottinger's cats. But
the cats, it's about the cats.
That's it. Go read that story. But yeah, Royal Lee was like, he is one of my heroes. So you'll have to see the work that he's done and what he was finding, because it's lining up here.
Well, and I know of a few doctors who use bioregulator. Actually, I met one Russian guy who lives in the States who's deep into bioregulators, and he uses standard process.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing over there. I trust them. I know exactly what's in that capsule. And you better believe there's So all a bioregulator is a very tiny amino acid chain that is naturally occurring. And that is protected. Like, the way that Kevinson talks about it is proteins are built very intentionally by nature, and they have very defined cleavage sites where they get broken down by proteases, like the enzymes in your body that break them down. So it's not like a coincidence that a certain sequence is maintained. It's by intention, because it has like little latches almost on either side so that it gets released as a unit from the full protein.
Amazing.
And then you've got these special little mechanisms that carry them across into the cell.
And then they're all folded specifically.
Well, they're arranged, so they're so tiny, they're not even folded, but they're arranged in space specifically. So I know that there's two bioregulators. I know one of them is Villon, and then there's another one, and they are the same two amino acids, but they're arranged differently in space, like in a 3D sense, spatially. And so therefore they have a different action.
This is so crazy. I'm just having such a epiphany right now because I got so in. One of the reasons I left chiropractic college and went to naturopathic school was because of Royal Lee's work and because of what he was doing. I'm finally getting the full circle here. I'm having a moment.
You were onto this before the rest of us, sister.
Oh, that was a long time ago. He called them protomorphogens, and I don't want to get Standard Process in trouble because I mean they disclose what's in their products, but like there's something there. There's an extraction process that really is quite magical, and I've seen it just be so potent and helpful in patients. It's really phenomenal. It really moves the needle. So this is a really exciting topic. I'm just kind of nerding out for a minute. So let's go back just a second though, because you talked about how the FDA did away with some of the long-chained peptides, and then there's some of the shorter chains that are still available orally. Just one?
No, sorry, just one of the short chain. Well, two actually, because if you really think about how GHK works, it really deserves to be a bioregulator. GHK acts on genes. It's an epigenetic switch flipper, right? So it's only that it wasn't discovered by Cavenson. So it didn't get it's kind of like, this grape, same grape as the one that's grown in Champagne, but you can't call it Champagne because it's not in Champagne region in France. Yeah. It's the same thing. So GHK and apidolon, which is the synthetic form of the pineal gland bioregulator, both are on that list of the FDA that have now been reclassified as class 2 compounds. But so there are synthetic versions of most of the other bioregulators, but the best way to go, I think, is with the oral form of the bioregulators for a couple of reasons. One of them is that they're now pretty easy. They're becoming much easier to buy. I've always bought them out of the UK from a company called Profound Health. The brand is called Nature's Marvels, but we now have companies like Integrative Peptides in the States that are bringing them in as well. So you can get Nature's Marvels from them. And you also see Integrative Peptides getting into this bioregulator game. And I think I just spoke at RadFest for the first time a couple weeks ago. I'm used to being the only kid at the conference talking about bioregulators. I was one of 3 talks on bioregulators.
Oh, good. Okay. So it's catching on.
First time ever. So it's really catching on. Ken Toltorf was one of the other speakers and he kind of snuck out a supplement. I think it was last year that he came out with Thymogen Alpha 1. The immune support. Well, it took me a minute, but when I looked into what it was, and I don't even know if I should even say that, but it's 2 bioregulators are in there.
Yeah. Well, they do list some different things in there, and I didn't know what those were. So it must be. So
they're amino acid complexes. So it turns out that the word bioregulator may go the way of the dodo bird. You may end up seeing them referred to as amino acid complexes, which is more of a regulatory thing than anything. But ultimately, we have access to these nutritional supplements that are, if you will, a more concentrated version of what you might be getting in a liver capsule. Right? So in a liver capsule, you have crushed liver, you're getting all the vitamins, you're probably getting some of that bioregulator in there, you're getting lots and lots of stuff. If you buy the liver bioregulator, really what's in there is it's more refined and it's more concentrated. So you're getting more of those amino acid sequences, but you're also getting some of the cofactors, which is why, in the literature, they talk about the oral bioregulator. Sometimes it takes a little longer to take effect, but the effects last longer. Whereas the synthetic bioregulator, it takes effect faster, but the effects don't seem to last as long necessarily. So maybe it's because the nutritional supplement is more of the complete package.
Right. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love this. My brain's doing a little like, I'm having flashbacks. So fun fact about me, 30 years ago, when I was an undergrad, I wrote a paper about mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. I was apparently way ahead of my time because now the topic is all the rage. I've since come to learn that one of the best ways we can care for and even generate new mitochondria is through adding new muscle mass to our bodies. Reason 150 that I tell you that strength training is non-negotiable. But building muscle is really challenging when your mitochondria are pooped out, and a lot of folks are walking around with pooped out mitochondria. Another way we can bolster our mitochondria is through postbiotics, which are the active nutrients our bodies make during digestion. Urolithin A is one of the first postbiotics shown to have major health benefits and has been shown to modulate mitochondrial activity via potential antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activities. Urolithin A upgrades your body's cellular power grid, giving your body the energy it needs to optimize muscle health. In fact, a 2022 study in Cell Reports Medicine showed that urolithin A improved muscle strength, exercise performance, and biomarkers of mitochondrial health in a randomized trial in middle-aged adults. And get this, it showed that 500 milligrams of urolithin A alone significantly increases muscle strength, endurance, and mobility in the absence of any exercise regimen and no change in lifestyle. My go-to for urolithin A is MitoPure from Timeline Nutrition. Timeline Nutrition is the global leader in urolithin A research, and their products are NSF certified for sport. Timeline Nutrition is offering 10% off your first order of MitoPure. Go to Timeline Nutrition /Dr. Tyna and use code Dr. Tyna to get 10% off your order. That's Timeline Nutrition, all spelled out one word, .com /DRTYNA. I recommend trying their starter pack with all 3 MitoPure options. Electrolyte imbalances are so common and can cause symptoms such as headaches, cramps, fatigue, brain fog, dizziness, weakness, and more. I finally committed to using electrolytes daily, and wow, have I noticed a difference in my energy and my performance in the gym. While I've tried nearly all the brands, my current electrolyte of choice is Element. Element helps anyone stay hydrated without the sugar and other dodgy ingredients found in popular electrolyte and sports drinks, and it's so tasty. Grapefruit salt is my current favorite flavor. Element has everything you need and nothing you don't. That means science-backed electrolyte ratios with none of the junk. No sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. I've teamed up with Element, and they've been gracious enough to offer a free gift with purchase to listeners of the Dr. Tyna Show. The free gift Element sample pack includes 1 packet of every flavor. This is the perfect offer for anyone who's interested in trying all of their flavors. They offer a no questions asked return policy on all orders, and you don't even have to send the product back. This offer is exclusively available for Dr. Tyna Show listeners, so be sure to use the link in the show notes to take advantage of it now. Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. I'm so glad to see that this idea is coming back around because it's so funny. I took so much heat from people for using glandulars. And many in the alternative healing or holistic healing space would come down upon it and say, that's not standardized enough. It's not clean enough. It's not controlled
it's natural,
enough.
Dude. It's nature.
It is. And I will say this, I do love hormones. Like I love prescribing hormones because hormones are a cleaner, straighter path. And you try to boost a woman's estrogen with glandulars and things can get real messy and they can start to look weird and it can get messy. And I do prefer like, give me an estrogen patch and some micronized progesterone because it's clean. Same with thyroid. I've seen with patients, thyroid desiccated prescription versus a capsule, glandular thyroid product. The capsules can get quite expensive. You often have to dose them high and it can get a little cracky. Like it can get a little too much. And so this is where I lean towards the prescription. And I was just talking to one of my team mates here and I was saying, the docs that can only use glandulars and can't prescribe hormones have no idea what they're missing.
Yeah.
But that said, you can do both. And I'm excited to see it coming around this far into something that's even maybe a little bit cleaner. But to say that I still think that there's utility in the whole gland. So I don't throw the glandulars out. I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If we're trying to tonify a thyroid, I'm going to give prescription desiccated thyroid preferentially, not so much the synthroid, although some patients really do need that, but most people do great on desiccated. But I'm also maybe going to throw in a product that has some herbs and nutrients, but maybe even some glandular thyroid. and balance it so that they're getting hit with all of it instead of just pure and maybe a little messier. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. But you know what's interesting? I wonder if where the bioregulator sits is between the glandular and the prescription.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Because with the thyroid bioregulator, which is a perfect example, it's the one I always use, you can use the thyroid bioregulator with someone who's either hypo or hyperthyroid.
Yeah.
Because it's going to normalize thyroid function. It's not going to, there's no T3, there's no T4, there's none of that. It's really just about restoring function to the gland. Or, you know, speaking of GLP-1s, how about doing a couple rounds of the pancreas bioregulator to help the pancreas to kind of restore itself as you're helping to maybe take the load off or whatever the case may be, and the liver. So I think like there's this really interesting opportunity to weave these bioregulators into other protocols to, you used a really good word, to tonify the body.
Yep. We're just modulating and tonifying. Mm-hmm. We, again, you said homeostasis earlier, and that's such a great way to put it. I'm always telling folks, I'm trying to get people back to homeostasis or some version of it. And that homeostasis is going to shift as we age. But the thing I love about some of these peptides and then this idea about bioregulators is that might actually improve the homeostatic level, meaning, you know, if I feel very different at 50 than I did at 40, but I don't feel terrible. I just, it's noticeable. And it was more noticeable than when I was 30, right? And so if we can keep that bar high.
Sorry.
That's okay. I have 3 of them, so I was waiting for one of them to come up and bark in my ear too. Your reaction was the best. You're like, Sarah, what kind of dog is it?
She's a mini Labradoodle, but she's 15 years old. She's in kick-ass physical shape and stone deaf.
she's giving it to you. She's like, I'm going to be loud enough. But really, it sounds like we now have the potential to set the tone higher and preserve some of that youthful version of homeostasis, if you will.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you know, the ones that are the most, and it's funny because a lot of the bioregulators, like you take a blood vessel bioregulator and you don't feel much necessarily, right? But what's happening is it's helping to restore the integrity of the endothelium of blood vessels. But when it comes to certain other ones, like for example, the prostate bioregulator, where I've seen with men who are getting up in the night a lot to go to the bathroom, and you give them a few rounds of the prostate bioregulator with the blood vessel bioregulator, and all of a sudden they don't seem to need to get up at night as often. Or the liver bioregulator stacked with a couple of other things, you might notice that people's liver values start to improve over time. So a couple of the principles I think that are important takeaways when we're using bioregulators is we often use them in stacks. So we don't use just one at a time. We you know, there's a lot of art and science here, right? So we want to think about what are the systems that are involved that are supporting each other that are going to need support. You don't just address an adrenal. You're going to address the adrenals and the thyroid and the hypothalamus. You're going to address that whole kind of chain to help everybody supporting everybody else kind of thing. But I've seen definitely the prostate do really noticeable things, the liver bioregulator doing noticeable things. Sometimes the ovarian one can help women in like the premenopause, kind of, it can help to kind of even things up. But in that state, you know, what else are you gonna support? You're gonna support the adrenals because they're being asked to pick up the load and they're stressed out of their minds. And if the adrenals are dragging, they're hanging on to the thyroid gland. So we better support thyroid, right? So
you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. This is so amazing. I've got to have you come in and speak to my group inside my paid program and really do a deeper dive, because this is it. This is such a nice way too. I was just looking through Integrative Peptides has several of these available, and I was thinking just that, like, oh, this is like a combo party when you and especially when you start to understand how systems work and you become more educated around it. There's a lot of potential here.
And a lot of intuition. Now, the other principle that's very important in bioregulators is we use them in pulses. So you don't use a bioregulator for 6 months every day. That is not the point. Think about it as sending a signal to the body and then backing off and letting the body do its thing. Now, you also want to make sure that the body has all the other things that it needs to act on the signal you're asking for. So if you're working on thyroid, we want to make sure that the antibodies are lower. We want to make sure that we've taken gluten out of the picture, let's say. We want to make sure that there's enough iodine, that there's selenium, that there's not a bunch of chlorine, that they're not pickling themselves in a swimming pool every day. Right? Right. Yeah. So we want to, you want to address the whole terrain, the whole picture, and allow these things to kind of come in and send a signal. So if we have someone that has a real issue, we might start with a 30-day run, but then we might do 10 days a month for a few months just to keep that signal going. But still, it's a little bit like yelling at your 2-year-old continuously. Eventually they tune you out.
Yep.
But if you give them a message and you back off and you let that little brain kind of process, sometimes you get a better result.
Absolutely. No, this makes perfect sense. This is beautiful. This is really how I go about treating people. I do the same thing actually with hormones. I do the same thing with peptides. It's just a matter of like, we're whispering to the system, and it's a whole lot easier to whisper and have success in a healthy body. So for those listening who are interested in this, again, just to reiterate, because we said it earlier, this is the type of thing, and not to say you can't move the needle when people are further down the path towards pathology, but those who are doing the other lifestyle interventions and really being diligent with that. And that's a lot of work, I realize, but it's a kind of non-negotiable by 50. If you're not doing all that stuff on the regular, you're not.
It's time to start.
Yeah.
It's time to start. I think that, in a lot of this, and there's so much published work on this. This is what's amazing, right? People are like, well, where's the research? Are they say, and there's a ton of research. What's cool about the bioregulators is they get used often with conventional medicine. Like they play really well with conventional medicine. They play really well to fix the damage done by conventional medicine.
Yeah.
They can be used for therapeutic purposes, but at that point, they're no longer a longevity. Well, they're part of a longevity program, if you will, but they're getting you to homeostasis, right? So I think, and peptides are a bit the same, right? Like BPC 157, which comes up a lot because it's so multi-talented, if you will. It can be really impactful for someone who's feeling really crappy at first, because it kind of gives them that glimmer of hope. Oh, I can actually feel better. Okay, well, let me do a couple of the other things she's been yammering about forever and see if I can feel even better. So I think they have applications to people who are really struggling, and they have different applications to people who are already optimized. You're just going to use them differently in different dosages and in different ways.
Yes. This reminds me of when I would do a very simple, like prolotherapy dextrose injection on somebody's knee, or even PRP, and they would come back and say, "Doc, you're a miracle worker." And I'm like, "No, this is just testament to how well you heal. That's you. That's the work you did. That's the cool part." So the more that you put in the work, and like you said, even along with conventional medicine, these things all harmonize and work together. I am never someone to poo-poo conventional medicine if it's needed, but sometimes we can mitigate some of the fallout, some of the side effects. We have tools to do all of this so that it harmonizes better and the person comes out the other end, a little less scathed, if you will.
Well, and maybe they don't have to, maybe down the road, they don't have to depend on the drugs as much. Like it will depend heavily from person to person. It'll depend on why they got to where they are. It depends on what went sideways. Are they willing to put in the work? Are they able to put in the work? Was the damage not too great? All of those different factors come into play, but there's no doubt that for people who are, just kind of going down that road, if they're willing to pull themselves back, like someone who's heading for type 2 diabetes or, metabolic disaster, if they have the wherewithal and they're willing to do the work and change the diet and the lifestyle and all the things, they can go back to being a really healthy person.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can reverse that diabetes for the most part, unless it's type 1. And even there, I think there's some really interesting work that's being done with exosomes and stem cells and all the other things that are out there.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done. And even if we can't get you back to, your prime, it doesn't matter. We can always improve. And we can sometimes, most often, significantly improve depending on how compliant the person is, how motivated they are. I say all this because I've had people message me and say, I bought a $150 bottle of oral peptides off the internet. It did nothing. And I'm like, yeah, what else were you doing? Like whose body did that go into? Yeah. And what were we expecting as the outcome? So I just want to reiterate that because I don't want people to think that they can. My dad is a great example. He's somebody that, he'll hammer some supplements that I give him and then it didn't do anything. I'm like, well, also, Dad, God only knows what you're putting in your mouth, and
it didn't work. But no, it didn't. Did you work?
Yeah, did you work? That's the question. Did you work? And I say all this because there's a message I keep trying to drive home to people. I'd love to hear how you phrase it. You did mention this earlier, like homeostasis versus optimization, but we've got this world in peptides, particularly with the GLP-1s. I mean, this is the weirdest part for me is over here with conventional allopathic medicine, it's being utilized in a very medicalized way to treat extreme pathology.
Yeah.
And the way that I'm talking about it is, hey, it's got this potential to do some really cool things in an entirely different dosage strategy over here in somebody who is already, they just need a little tinkering, right? So you call it optimization or longevity. It's just a little tinkering. And that's who would come into my practice is it was application only. I only wanted to treat people who had done the work for decades and just needed a little tinkering because it was not ethical to put regenerative injections into somebody's joints who were a complete train wreck of health. No disrespect, but you have to be able to heal for these injections to work. It doesn't matter how fancy the solution in the syringe is. If the body's not in a healing state, they're not going to take or keep or hold very long. And I think I think a lot of regenerative injection docs don't screen their patients. They'll take anyone. And I think it's super unethical. I think the same thing about peptides. So when folks are needing really high doses of something, that's a very pharmacologic, medicalized, it's a totally different conversation than what I'm trying to have. I'd love to hear how you go about discussing this with your clients or with the public.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm on the same page as you. I think that we are conditioned as a society to be looking for a silver bullet, and it doesn't really exist. And I think when the GLP-1s came out, to your point, everybody's like, oh, silver bullet. Yay. All I have to do is take this shot once a week and I'm going to be skinny and it's going to be amazing and my problems will be over. And then lo and behold, everybody's like, oh, but I lost all my muscle. It turns out that sitting on the couch eating a donut a day wasn't so good for me after all. I mean, I got skinny. I got that part right. But oh, look at my face. It's too skinny and I have no muscle left. And it's like, yeah, so dude, here's the thing. Like your body's super smart. And if you don't give it a reason to hang on to muscle, it's going to ditch it because it's really expensive real estate. So it's, I just think that I believe that, and if people are listening to this podcast, my guess is they're already on this boat. Like they get it.
Yeah.
They understand that we need to keep looking at how can we continue to create a terrain in our bodies that facilitates healing and improvement. And so becoming metabolically flexible is one of those things. And I think that's, and I think that like my body fights metabolic flexibility tooth and nail. And so I have to work at it. Like I got to work out and I got to watch my diet and I got to do all the things. And yeah, you know what? I'll dip into the GLP-1s every once in a while just to give myself a tune-up because like every gene I have that could possibly push me to type 2 diabetes is switched on.
Me too. So, me too. It's like, good luck, sister.
And I'm not going there for, like it's just not going to happen. But we have to also manage things that are making us inflamed. And, I just had a test read by a scientist that looked at how are my mitochondria working. And he's like, wow, this pathway is working really well, but that pathway is not looking so good. So we're constantly going in to understand what are the aspects of our physiology that are dragging us down and what can we do to bring them up? And so as a result, the cool thing is today we have all these incredible tools that weren't necessarily available to us even 10 years ago, right? When it comes to peptides and the GLP-1s have really changed the game. And I think I'm with you that GLP-1s are an incredible tool for people who are willing to use them properly. And And the danger of them is it's easy not to use them properly and to get what seems like the result they want, but then they end up realizing that, being skinny fat's no hell.
No, that's, well, it significantly increases your risk for all-cause mortality. I mean, folks who are skinny fat, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, have a higher risk for death from all causes than folks who are heavy set and metabolically compromised. It's a disaster. Yeah. It's a absolutely crippling of the metabolic health if people crank those things and don't do anything else. I think it's a disaster waiting to happen on the other side. So you did say something somewhere I saw. You always say these brilliant little clips and they're in my head. You said something about how GLP-1s give people a window of opportunity to make the changes. And I've seen that too. And it's something I've reiterated is like, for some reason, the way that it's working on the reward pathways in the brain is it's giving people that chance to actually think straight and to make good decisions. And I tell folks, I'm never trying to dose someone into appetite suppression. I'm just trying to dose them into appetite control. But that's control across everything, because I'm getting messages from people saying, I quit doom scrolling on social media all day. I quit shopping all the time online. I quit gambling. I quit all kinds of vices. Suddenly they're back in the driver's seat. And that's another very cool reason, because it just gives you a chance to go, and take measure of what it is that you're choosing to do or not do. And we can override all of that with super high doses of any of these peptides. I mean, however peptide works, you can crank it into, you can overdose on a lot of these and put yourself in a bad place. Then nobody ever talks about that. It's very individualized.
Well, I've seen the GLP. I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen GLP-1s where people get impatient and they just keep cranking the dose, and all of a sudden they stop losing weight.
Yep.
The body slams on the brakes and goes, actually, this is not going to work for me.
Yeah. You get
we're going to become immune to this. Sorry? Yeah.
You get cellular resistance. I mean, you'll get cellular resistance to anything that you crank too long and too hard, and you can chew through them. That's how I call it. People eat right through them sometimes. They'll just override this is why, going back to your comment about stacking things, this is why having, and I talk about this inside my course, is like we're doing multiple things at once because we want to be able to keep all the things as low as possible, including the hormones. I see the same thing with hormones, patients needing higher and higher and higher doses of hormones for it to work because they're really not taking care of their lifestyle. And you just override the signal and you desensitize the cellular receptors. It's a mess.
It's a mess, but the good news is there's a way out, and there's more of these, in the regenerative space, in the peptide space, now the bioregulator space, there's these opportunities to really bring the body back online and to get back in line with the body.
I love that.
I think it's just another really great opportunity to work with our bodies and not try to play God with it, right? We're not shutting down a pathway. We're not cranking up another pathway. We're not disabling a feedback loop that's there for very good reason, or another one we don't even know is there, right? We're not, all we're doing is we're just, to your point, whispering to the body, hey, and giving it a little bit of support and a nudge that says, oh, I know how to do that.
Yes. Yes. It's like Salt Bay, that meme of the guy who sprinkles the salt on the steak. That's what I'm like, just a little sprinkle here, a little sprinkle there, and in a healthy body, or even people who just they come in and they seem like it's going to be a complete dumpster fire. The minute they start trying, things get so much better. It's amazing. It's like the body hears your attempt. So we have these great tools to help that along and give people a leg up and make it easier. I'm all for making things easier for people at the end of the day. People these folks over here screaming about how awful GLP-1s are just sounds so ignorant at this point, because I'm like, you guys, we're trying to, what are we going to make them white knuckle it?
Yeah, why? That doesn't work.
Yes, right. If it worked, we wouldn't be in the situation. So let's help people however we can. And this bioregulator conversation is fascinating because sometimes we do apply, like myself, for instance, I've had such severe Hashimoto's for so long, and I've really had to drive the thyroid hormone just to stay upright. And same with the adrenal support. And it's so exciting to think about something that could tonify the organ to, maybe give it a little something to
Well, and that's the thing, like versus the glandular that risks like giving it a goose that it's not ready for.
Yeah.
This is much more gentle.
Yes. I love that.
Right. And so, and there was a woman in my group who'd been dealing with Hashimoto's for years and working at it with her naturopath for years and years. And she introduced the thyroid bioregulator, and it seemed to have been the last piece of the puzzle that just got everything to click. And so I am not saying that go run out and buy boxes of thyroid bioregulator and it's going to fix your Hashimoto's, but I'm saying that in a holistic and a full plan, it can actually sometimes be that one missing piece that'll tip the scales in your favor.
I love it. I love it. This is so great. I'm so glad I had you on. Well, you have a ton of cool stuff everywhere. So tell people where they can find you and tell them about your podcast and your Facebook group and all of it.
Well, thank you. So the podcast is Longevity with Nathalie Niddam, and which Dr. Tina Moore is going to be a guest on. I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
And I do have a Facebook community. I have to confess, I'm not in there much anymore these days. It's called Optimizing Superhuman Performance. I do have a membership community, which is smaller. It is paid, but it's not wildly expensive for people who are willing to put a little bit of money in. It's a much smaller world. I do live Q&As in there. I'm doing a year of Bioregulators program in there where I'm coaching individual people on cycling through the Bioregulators for a year. Like we do all kinds of cool stuff. And then I have a newsletter, which you can sign up for at natniddam.com. And natniddam.com, I'm just going to tell you guys right now, is under construction. So it's looking a little rough. It's nothing on that website is really accurate. There's a Nat recommend section, but at the top of the page, there's a sign up for Nat's newsletter little thing. Just go there, click on that and sign up for the newsletter. And we do lots of things in the newsletter. So hopefully you get some value out of it.
Yes. And bum rush her Instagram because she's in my boat where they don't let us grow. So let's go get her some growth over there.
Not these days.
My audience fervent. They'll give you a little bump. It'll.
Oh, thanks you guys. I'm happy to meet you.
It'll help. Okay. Well, so wonderful to have you on. I'm so glad we finally got to connect, and I look forward to seeing you at some conferences here soon. So
same.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Tina Show. This is a Wellness Loud production produced by Drake Peterson and mixed by Mike Fry. Theme song is by John the Guilt. You can watch the full video version of this podcast inside the Spotify app or on YouTube. As always, you can email the podcast at podcast@drtina.com. That's DRTYNA. And if you like this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can also find all of my offerings on my website at drtina.com. For more shows by my team, go to wellnessloud.com. See you next time, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practices of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content on this podcast is intended not to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.